Kia ora, good evening. When police first investigated the death of Philip James Nisbet, they concluded it was suicide. But the coroner disagreed. She said there wasn't enough evidence to find he'd taken his own life. The 47-year-old Nisbet died at home in Christchurch in bed. His body contained high levels of phenergan, an allergy drug, the most likely cause of death, says the coroner. But the big question remains, did he take the drug himself, or is there some other explanation? Either way, questions are being asked, and police have reopened their homicide investigation. This report from John Hudson.
In a Christchurch graveyard, a memorial for Phil Nisbet, dead at 47. A dearly loved father, son and brother who was said to have committed suicide more than 2 years ago. However, Phil Nisbet's sister Leanne believes he didn't take his own life.
The pathologist said death was very instant, that he hadn't gone into a coma, that it wasn't a prolonged death, that it was, very quick.
What's astounding about this case is that within days of Phil Nisbet's death, family, friends, neighbours said that they didn't think it was suicide at all. They said they had evidence that pointed to murder, and they took those concerns to the police. But the police said after a long investigation, they could find no conclusive evidence that backed up the family's concerns. However, now, more than 2 years later, they've reopened the investigation.
Did you tell the police you thought Phil's death may not have been suicide?
Yes, and we heard later on that other family members on Helen's side had contacted the police, and they just didn't seem to care.
What got the police re-investigating was coroner Sue Johnson, who in May this year said she was unable to find that Phil Nisbet committed suicide. The coroner was told how on May the 3rd, 2009, Phil Nisbet went to bed. In the morning, he was dead, here at his Christchurch home.
Did his death come as a big shock to you?
It was just inconceivable.
At the time, Leanne Cartier was at her home on Queensland's Gold Coast.
My first thought was maybe like a truck accident, because he was a truck driver and, I could have comprehended it if it was something like that.
But suicide didn't seem plausible?
No.
Phil's family in Australia were puzzled.
We were all so shocked by it. We didn't question it too much. We were just listening to what we were fed and trying to process it, so...
Helen Nisbet, Phil's wife of 3.5 years, told the police she believed her husband had taken an overdose of tablets. The coroner heard how the police had been called just before 6 a.m. by Helen Nisbet. She told the officers she'd got up at 2 a.m. before falling asleep on the living room couch. At about 5:45, she said, she found her husband dead. In a drawer beside Phil Nisbet's deathbed, the coroner was told police found 2 empty foils of phenergan, 50 tablets gone. Phenergan is for allergies and insect bites, but take too much of it and it will kill you.
They should have treated it as a crime scene. In my view, they should have fingerprinted the phenergan packets.
The coroner heard how in front of the officers, Helen Nisbet switched on her cell phone. On it, a text sent from Phil Nisbet's phone, allegedly by him, allegedly from their bedroom.
I'm sorry, honey. I can't keep going like this. I love you so much.
They should have traced all her phone calls, all her text messages.
Then?
There and then.
The coroner says that the alleged suicide text found on Helen Nisbet's phone was sent from Phil Nisbet's phone at 10:30. That was an hour after Helen Nisbet says that he went to bed on the night before he was found dead. Helen Nisbet says that when she went to bed at about 10:30, her husband was asleep, or at least drowsy.
The coroner says,
Other than the fact that the message was sent from his phone, There is no other evidence to indicate he sent it.
4 days after his death, Phil Nisbet's funeral was held here at Wainoni Baptist. It's the church he'd attended until his early 20s, in the neighbourhood where Phil and his siblings were raised.
When we were at the funeral, we were shown the suicide text.
On a phone.
Yeah, on Phil's phone.
The grieving Nisbets were shocked by the text, but members of Helen Nisbet's own family, the Milners, had serious concerns about the suicide message.
The coroner was told that 9 days after Phil Nisbet's death, Helen Nisbet's mother, her brother, her son's pregnant girlfriend, came here to the Papanui police station to tell the police that they believed that Helen Nisbet was responsible for her husband's death. So you told the police you'd heard Helen talking about wanting Phil dead?
Yeah. I just told them everything I knew.
Do you think the police took you seriously?
No, not at all. I don't think so, because nothing ever got done about it. We never really heard back.
Today, Casey Woodstock is a single mum, but in 2009, in the months before Phil's death, she lived with Helen Nisbet's son Adam at Phil and Helen Nisbet's house. Casey Woodstock told the coroner Helen Nisbet had told her she wanted Phil Nisbet knocked off.
Me and Adam used to sit out in the garage and have a cigarette and just put the door up, and Helen would come out and sit out there with us on the deck chair and just sit there and mumble away, "Oh, I can't wait till he's dead. He annoys me," just silly things. It was just constant. It was just niggle-piggle things about Phil.
6 days before Phil Nisbet's death, Adam and Casey, then 31 weeks pregnant, moved into this flat. One evening, Casey says, Helen Nisbet came to visit.
She was just about to leave and she asked where the closest 24-hour pharmacy was to go and get Finnegan, because Phil was on his way home from Amberley.
In the morning and
In her statement to the coroner, Casey Woodstock said Helen Nisbet
was blatantly open about wanting to get some Finnegan. She didn't say what she wanted it for.
The coroner also saw statements from Helen Nisbet's former work colleagues at Ground Services.
They told the coroner that Helen Nisbet talked about killing Phil Nisbet with poison or chemicals. However, the coroner said that was only evidence that Mrs. Nisbet talked about killing her husband, not that she actually did kill him.
Helen Nisbet's son Adam told the coroner he believed his mother had tried to overdose Phil Nisbet a month earlier. He claimed he'd seen her with Panadol capsules packed with what Helen Nisbet told him was Finnegan. This was before Phil Nisbet collapsed and was taken to hospital.
This was some months before he died?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
However, the coroner said,
I cannot put any weight on the statement made by Mrs. Nisbet's son. There is too much other evidence that indicates he is not a disinterested witness.
Casey Woodstock was with Adam when the police came to tell him his stepfather was dead.
Adam went to the room and just cried and cried and cried. He just couldn't believe it.
What did you say to Helen at that stage?
We never said much to her, and she texted us that morning saying that he left a suicide note and stuff like that.
She talked about a suicide note?
No, she texted us about the suicide note that morning.
Did you actually see a suicide note?
No.
The coroner was not only shown a typed suicide note, but also presented with a variety of explanations as to how many suicide notes there were, how they were written, and where they were found.
She said she'd found it in the safe.
Leanne, Phil Nisbet's sister, first heard about a typed suicide note when Helen Nisbet contacted her in Australia.
She told my parents that it was found in the safe, and she told a girlfriend of mine.
However, Leanne says when she returned to New Zealand a fortnight later, Helen Nisbet's story had changed.
She poured me a drink, and then she brought the suicide note out, and as she handed it to me, she said, "Here's the suicide note that I found in the bedside drawer." And my head's going, she told me it was in the safe. And I looked at it, and it was typed up, and there was a handwritten Phil at the bottom. And I looked at the Phil, and I thought, that's not Phil's handwriting.
On June the 15th, Leanne told the police about the typed, signed suicide note Helen Nisbet had shown her.
The policeman who interviewed me said, "Why don't we have this note?" I'm like...
The coroner says
The police didn't see any note until July 6, 2009, some 6 weeks after Mrs Nisbet found it. Despite police knowing that concerns had been raised on May 13 about Mr Nisbet's death not being suicide.
Yeah.
After the break,
The coroner was unable to come to a conclusion.
Yeah, and now the police are trying to charge me with murder.
and we try and resolve some of those inconsistencies.
Now, off.
Helen Nisbet's husband, Phil, was dead. She says he committed suicide, but his relatives don't believe it, and the next-door neighbours were also concerned. Did Helen and Phil argue?
Yep.
Often?
Yep.
Ray Carey, Phil Nisbet's next-door neighbour, told the coroner he also saw a suicide note.
Who showed you the suicide note?
Helen.
Ray says Helen retained that note, and he hasn't seen it since.
And was it typewritten or handwritten?
It was typewritten, but it had a handwritten signature.
Ray Carey says he worked with Phil Nisbet, knew him well enough to know what his signature looked like.
I'd seen his signature before and it just didn't sort of match up.
Leanne says the suicide note Helen Nisbet gave the police is not the same note she was shown.
When I came over for the inquest, I actually brought my girls' birthday cards that he gave to them in May because they were signed Phil, to prove to the coroner that it wasn't his handwriting on the bottom. And she opened her file for us to compare, and there was no pen writing on the bottom, you know.
So you think there's two totally separate suicide notes, one signed, one not signed?
Yes, there's definitely two notes. There's no doubt about that.
And there are other unanswered questions. Ray says his wife saw something unusual next door on the night Phil died.
Karen, she seen the lights on at 4:20 in the morning.
Ray Carey is a shift worker. He and his wife Karen are early risers.
And what lights did she see on?
The whole house.
The whole of Helen and Phil's house, including the bedroom.
My wife actually asked Helen straight out that day Phil died why the lights were on at 4:20 in the morning, and she didn't answer.
Helen Nisbet was asked by the police about a bathroom light being on at 4:30. She said,
"It was not that I am aware of."
Ray Carey told Leanne about his wife Karen seeing the lights on. Leanne told the police.
I rang them after I'd spoken to Ray.
So 3 months after Phil's death, you'd told the police about seeing a signed suicide note, about the neighbours seeing the lights on in the middle of the night, and they still weren't taking you seriously.
Where is the justice? Like, if you can't rely on the police to do the right thing, who can you?
Coroner Sue Johnson commented,
Police did not uplift the family computer to see if the note had been typed on it and when it was typed.
she found Mrs Nisbet to be an unreliable witness.
There are a lot of inconsistencies in her evidence. It is possible these are due to the stress brought on by finding her husband dead.
These days, Helen Nisbet is again living with a previous partner. Helen Nisbet told the police he moved in with her 2 months after her husband's death. But neighbour Ray Carey says it was just after Phil's funeral.
He actually moved in the day that Phil's parents went back to Australia.
Helen Nisbet and her former partner have moved from the Christchurch house in which Phil Nisbet died to Eastern Christchurch. But life has not been going well for Helen. Phil Nisbet's life insurance company is refusing to pay out on his policy.
John Hudson's my name. I'm from the Sunday program at TV New Zealand. We're been looking into your former husband's death, Phil's death.
Interested.
Sunday hoped she could now explain the inconsistencies the coroner had referred to in her decision.
Story about it for the television.
I'm not interested.
Why aren't you interested in talking to us?
Because I have been through the mill over all of this.
Yeah, but the coroner was unable to come to a conclusion.
Yeah, and now the police are trying to charge me with murder.
Well,
for a suicide. And
well,
I'm not, I
Helen, can I just... we just want to sort a few things out with you.
speak to my barrister.
Phil's sister Leanne's been talking to us, and she gave us some... Well, I just want to clear some things up, okay? She said that she saw a suicide note with his signature on it. Is that right?
Look, talk to my barrister about it, okay? I've got no comment about it.
Nothing about what Leanne says. What about the next door neighbours who say that the lights were on during the night? No? Helen certainly wasn't in a mood for explanations.
Don't touch my card or I will have the cops on you. Now, off.
Did you kill him?
No, I did not. If I had, I would have been arrested by now, would I not?
Well, you may be arrested.
So
I'm not sure.
You put all this on TV, are you?
Well, I may be.
Good.
You sure
Because you'll be in court for that.
You sure you don't want to be on TV yourself?
No, I do not.
Coroner Sue Johnson was unable to rule that Phil Nisbet committed suicide.
One of the difficulties in this inquiry is a lack of evidence of sufficient weight.
So how did Phil Nisbet die? Well, more than 2 years on, there are still many unanswered questions.
It's still not over. You know, it would have been nice to wait and put this plaque down once there was finally closure, but, you know, who knows how long off that'll be.
So, police have confirmed a homicide investigation into the death of Phil Nisbet is ongoing, and as we've just heard from the coroner, a lot of questions remain unanswered. Of course, we'll let you know of any developments.